My mother-in-law invited my husband's ex-girlfriend to our fifth wedding anniversary dinner and ordered me to give up my seat for her. She called my small plant shop a pathetic failure right in front of the entire restaurant. I just smiled and quietly moved my chair. What she did not know was that I was the anonymous majority shareholder of her son's real estate firm, and I was about to dismantle their entire lives. My name is Fiona. I am 34 years old, and I spent 5 years playing the role of a quiet, supportive wife to a man who never truly saw me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who severely underestimated your worth. The evening was supposed to be a celebration. Spencer and I were marking our fifth wedding anniversary at one of the most exclusive five-star steakhouses in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the white tablecloths, and the room was filled with the low hum of expensive conversations. I had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing a tailored emerald gown, hoping tonight would remind Spencer of why we fell in love in the first place. Instead, he had invited his mother. Barbara was 62 years old and carried herself like royalty, despite the fact that her husband had left her with nothing but a heavily mortgaged house and an inflated sense of entitlement. She wore a string of pearls and a permanent expression of disapproval, especially when looking at me. I had long ago accepted that I would never meet her standards. To Barbara, I was just Fiona, the girl with dirt under her fingernails, who ran a struggling botanical nursery. She wanted a daughter-in-law, with a trust fund, and a pedigree, someone who could elevate her own social standing at the country club. We had barely received our water glasses when Barbara stood up, smoothing her dress. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "Move to the end of the table," she demanded, her voice carrying across the quiet dining room. Vanessa is a guest of honor tonight, and she prefers the booth seat next to Spencer." I froze, the menu slipping from my hands. Vanessa was Spencer's ex-girlfriend. They had dated for 2 years before we met, and Barbara had never stopped mourning the end of their relationship. Vanessa was exactly what Barbara wanted: a woman who pretended to be an old money heiress, constantly name-dropping luxury brands and European vacation spots. I looked at Spencer, expecting him to intervene. We were celebrating our anniversary. Surely he would not allow his mother to invite his ex-girlfriend and demand I give up my seat beside him. Spencer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, refusing to meet my eyes. "Just move, Fiona," he muttered under his breath. "Do not make a scene in front of Mom's guest." A cold, sharp realization settled in my chest. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of supporting him while he built his commercial real estate firm, and he would not even defend my right to sit next to him at our own anniversary dinner. I did not argue. I did not cry or cause the scene he was so afraid of. I calmly stood up, picked up my napkin, and moved to the lonely chair at the far end of the long table. Moments later, Vanessa walked in. She was 33 years old, wearing a clinging designer dress that left little to the imagination. She practically glided across the restaurant, tossing her expensive coat to a waiter before approaching our table. She offered Barbara a theatrical kiss on the cheek and then turned to Spencer, wrapping her arms around his neck and hugging him a little too tightly. "Happy anniversary, Spence," she purred, sliding into the booth seat that had been mine just a minute prior. "It is so good to see you doing so well." She finally glanced down the table at me, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. "Hi, Fiona. Hope you do not mind me crashing." Barbara insisted I join. "I am sure she did," I replied evenly, taking a sip of my water. The dinner that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Barbara and Vanessa dominated the conversation, transforming our anniversary dinner into an exclusive club where I was not welcome. Barbara loudly boasted about Vanessa's wealthy lineage, making sure the waiters and the tables nearby could hear every word. "Vanessa comes from such a wonderful family," Barbara announced, swirling her red wine. "Her father practically built the luxury housing market in this city. It is just so refreshing to be around people who understand high-level business and true success." Vanessa feigned modesty, waving a hand adorned with diamond rings. "Oh, Barbara, you flatter me. But it is true, growing up with that kind of wealth does teach you how to manage a legacy. It is a shame not everyone has that kind of background." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes dripping with fake pity. Speaking of which, Fiona, how is that cute little failing plant shop of yours doing? I heard retail is just brutal these days. It must be so exhausting working with dirt all day for pennies. Barbara laughed a sharp grating sound. It is practically a charity at this point. I keep telling Spencer he needs to stop letting you drain his resources. A CEO's wife should be hosting charity galas, not potting ferns in a dirty apron. Spencer chuckled nervously, adjusting his tie. It keeps her busy, Mom. Let her have her hobbies. I sliced a piece of steak, chewing it slowly as I watched them tear down my life. What they did not know, what absolutely nobody in that room knew, was that my cute little failing plant shop was nothing more than a passion project. It was a convenient tax write-off for my actual career. I was a venture capitalist. For the past 7 years, I had quietly built an empire investing in tech startups and commercial developments under a web of anonymous proxy companies. 2 years ago, when Spencer's real estate firm was on the brink of absolute bankruptcy, he was desperate. He had taken out massive loans and was facing total ruin. He cried to me about losing everything. Behind his back, using one of my corporate entities, I stepped in as an anonymous angel investor. I injected millions into his failing firm, saving him from bankruptcy, and taking a 65% majority ownership stake in the process. Spencer strutted around thinking his business acumen had attracted a mysterious billionaire investor. He had no idea that the wife he was currently ignoring at the end of the dinner table literally owned him. I watched him nod along as Vanessa and Barbara mocked my financial status. Every insult they hurled at me just confirmed that I was making the right decision. My marriage was not a partnership. It was a bad investment, and I was an expert at cutting my losses. As the main courses were cleared away, Vanessa reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a heavy velvet box. She slid it across the table toward Spencer, her eyes sparkling with malicious intent. "I know I am just a guest tonight," she said, her voice loud enough to ensure I heard every syllable. "But I wanted to get you a little belated anniversary gift, Spencer, for old time's sake, to celebrate all your recent success." Spencer's eyes widened as he opened the box. Inside rested a gleaming $20,000 Rolex Submariner. It was an extravagant, wildly inappropriate gift for an ex-girlfriend to give a married man, especially in front of his wife. "Vanessa, you should not have," Spencer gasped, pulling the watch out and admiring it in the restaurant light. "This is incredible." Barbara clapped her hands together. "Oh, it is stunning. That is the kind of watch a true industry leader wears. You see, Spencer, this is what happens when you surround yourself with people who understand your caliber." Spencer eagerly unbuckled his old watch and strapped the Rolex onto his wrist. He could not stop staring at it. He thanked Vanessa profusely, completely ignoring the fact that earlier that morning I had given him a custom-engraved vintage pocket watch that had belonged to his late grandfather. I had spent months tracking it down from a private collector because Spencer had always talked about how much he missed it. He had tossed it on his dresser without a second glance. Yet here he was, fawning over a flashy piece of metal from a woman who was actively trying to destroy our marriage. I sat back in my chair, resting my hands in my lap. I did not feel heartbroken anymore. The sadness had burned away, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a pathetic poor florist who had lucked into marrying a successful businessman. They thought they could humiliate me in public, and I would just take it because I had nowhere else to go. I looked at Spencer, laughing at a joke Vanessa had just made, his hand resting a little too close to hers on the table. He was going to lose everything. The waiter approached our table with quiet efficiency. He carried a sleek black leather folio containing the final damage for the evening. He placed it precisely in the center of the table, perfectly equidistant between Spencer and Vanessa, completely bypassing me. That small gesture alone spoke volumes about how the evening had played out. Spencer cleared his throat, puffing out his chest as he reached for the folio. He flipped it open with a practiced flick of his wrist. I sat perfectly still at the far end of the table, watching his eyes scan the itemized list. The total was $4,200. It was a staggering amount for a simple dinner, but they had ordered a vintage Bordeaux imported caviar and dry-aged steaks that cost more than most people made in a week. Spencer did not even flinch. He was entirely focused on playing the role of the wildly successful real estate tycoon for his ex-girlfriend. He reached into his designer wallet and pulled out a heavy platinum credit card. He placed it squarely on top of the receipt with a loud thud. Client acquisition costs, Spencer declared, shooting a charming and utterly arrogant grin across the table at Vanessa. Consider this a minor investment in old friendships and bright new beginnings. Vanessa leaned forward, brushing her bare shoulder against his suit jacket. I hope we did not do too much damage tonight, Spencer. I just could not resist ordering that specific wine. My father always says a premium meal is completely wasted without the proper pairing. Barbara beamed at the two of them, practically vibrating with pride. You see, Vanessa Spencer has done remarkably well for himself. His commercial real estate firm is acquiring high-end properties all over the downtown area. He is a true visionary in the industry. I kept my face perfectly blank. Spencer's firm was currently drowning in toxic debt. The only reason his office doors were still open was because my venture capital proxy firm had silently bailed him out 2 years ago. I legally owned 65% of his company. Every lavish dinner, every expensive tailored suit, and every single drop of that vintage Bordeaux he just bought for his ex-girlfriend was funded entirely by my money. And less than an hour ago, I had authorized my wealth manager to pull the plug. The waiter took the folio and disappeared toward the back of the restaurant. We sat in the warm glow of the dining room. Vanessa was animatedly telling a story about her recent vacation to the Amalfi Coast, while Spencer hung on her every word. Barbara nodded along, occasionally shooting me a smug look, clearly waiting for me to break down in tears and leave. I simply took a slow sip of my sparkling water. The waiter returned much faster than expected. His professional smile was gone. He looked uncomfortable, his posture rigid as he leaned down to speak quietly to my husband. But in the hushed, elegant atmosphere of the fine dining room, his words carried perfectly to my end of the table. Sir, I apologize, but your card has been declined. The entire table went dead silent. The story about the Amalfi Coast died on Vanessa's lips. Spencer's face flushed a deep and violent shade of crimson. He snatched the platinum card back from the leather folder, his voice rising in a mixture of sudden panic and defensive anger. Declined. That is absolutely impossible. Run the card again. There must be a problem with your payment machine. I have a massive credit limit on that specific corporate account. I did run it twice, sir, the waiter replied, maintaining his polite composure, despite Spencer's rising tone. The bank issued a hard decline and requested that you contact their fraud department immediately. Barbara let out an offended theatrical gasp. Well, this is clearly an embarrassing bank error. Spencer deals with multi-million-dollar contracts on a daily basis. Their fraud department probably flagged the transaction because of the high amount. Such a terrible nuisance for people in our tax bracket. The banks are always overreacting to large dinner tabs. Spencer frantically dug into his wallet again. His hands were visibly shaking. He pulled out a second corporate credit card, this one a gold rewards card, and shoved it toward the waiter without making eye contact. Try this one. It is a completely different business account. It will go through without an issue. We sat in agonizing silence while the waiter walked away for the second time. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her booth, smoothing the fabric of her designer dress. Spencer pulled out his phone, hiding it under the edge of the table as he opened his banking application. I watched him tap the screen, his breathing growing shallow and fast. He was frantically refreshing the page. I watched the horrible realization wash over his features. The corporate accounts were completely frozen. I had made absolutely sure of it. The waiter returned, looking even more tense. Sir, I am very sorry. That second card has also been declined by your financial institution. The message on the terminal says the account has been restricted. Do you perhaps have another alternative form of payment? People at the neighboring tables were actively staring now. The wealthy elite of Chicago did not look kindly upon people who caused dramatic scenes because they could not pay their extravagant bills. The hushed whispers started echoing around the room. Diners were leaning in, watching the spectacle unfold. Spencer looked like he was going to be physically sick. He had just happily accepted a $20,000 Rolex watch from his ex-girlfriend, and now he could not even afford to buy her a steak dinner. Vanessa let out a musical, highly condescending laugh. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. Oh, Spencer, please do not stress about it. The corporate banking systems are so antiquated and overly sensitive these days. Let me take care of this bill. It is just pocket change anyway. She pulled out a heavy titanium card and handed it to the waiter with a practiced, arrogant smile. Just put the entire evening on this card. My father's trust fund account covers absolutely everything. He insists I never carry common cash. Barbara clasped her hands together, looking at Vanessa with pure, unfiltered adoration. You are far too generous, Vanessa. You are simply pure class. Spencer, you must make sure to treat her to something spectacularly expensive next week to make up for this silly banking error. Vanessa turned her gaze toward me, her eyes practically shining with malice. Well, someone has to step up when the husband is having a banking issue. And we all know Fiona cannot afford a dinner like this on a florist's salary. Do not worry, Fiona. Dinner is on me tonight. Consider it a charitable donation. I did not respond. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Vanessa's entire life was a carefully constructed, pathetic lie. She did not have a trust fund. Her father had gone completely bankrupt 5 years ago. I had run a thorough, invasive background check on her the moment I realized Spencer was sneaking around behind my back. Vanessa was currently drowning in consumer debt, desperately searching for a wealthy man to save her from financial ruin. The waiter returned for the third time. He did not even try to hide his annoyance. His face was a mask of cold professionalism as he placed Vanessa's heavy metal card on the table with a sharp, definitive click. Ma'am, this card has been declined for insufficient funds. Vanessa's jaw dropped open. The smug, superior smile vanished from her face instantly. That is why, she hissed, her voice losing all of its refined old money polish. Run it again right now. Do you have any idea who my family is? I have run it 3 separate times, ma'am. The terminal clearly indicates insufficient funds. We will need a valid form of payment immediately, or I will have no choice but to call the general manager and involve local authorities. Pure panic set in. It was a true, undeniable panic that stripped away all their fake glamour. Spencer and Vanessa stared at each other, the grand illusion of their high society lives shattering right in front of my eyes. Barbara looked like she was about to faint into her empty wine glass. The golden girl she had been praising all evening was completely broke, and her successful son was suddenly penniless. The silence stretched until it became physically painful to watch. The surrounding tables were quiet, everyone listening to the unbelievable humiliation unfolding. Finally, I placed my cloth napkin neatly on the table and stood up. I walked slowly from my exiled seat at the far end of the table and stopped right behind Spencer's chair. I reached into my modest clutch and pulled out my personal corporate card. It was a heavy, unmarked black card, issued strictly to top-tier venture capital executives. There were no spending limits. There were no unexpected declines. I handed it directly to the waiter. Put the entire bill on this card, please, and add a 30% gratuity for your trouble. I sincerely apologize for the delay and the inconvenience. The waiter took the heavy black card, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized the exclusive banking insignia reserved for individuals with astronomical net worth. Right away, madam, he said, bowing his head respectfully before walking off with a renewed sense of urgency. Spencer stared up at me, his face pale and covered in a thin layer of sweat. Fiona, what is that? Where did you get that kind of card? Barbara quickly recovered from her initial shock and immediately went on the offensive, desperate to regain control of the narrative before she drowned in embarrassment. She probably took out another high-interest credit card. Barbara sneered, her voice dripping with venom and judgment. Are you completely out of your mind, Fiona? You cannot possibly afford a $4,000 dinner. Your little plant shop barely makes enough money to keep the lights on. You are going to be drowning in crippling debt for the rest of your pathetic life just to show off. I looked down at my mother-in-law. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger or hurt. I simply smiled down at her with absolute unwavering confidence. Do not worry about my personal finances, Barbara. I am remarkably good at managing my investments, and I am even better at knowing exactly when to cut my losses. The waiter returned promptly, handing me the printed receipt and a silver pen. I signed it quickly with a steady hand, slipping the black card back into my clutch. I looked at the three of them sitting in the booth, entirely defeated and thoroughly humiliated by the woman they had spent the last 2 hours treating like garbage. "Happy anniversary, Spencer," I said smoothly, my voice cold and detached. "Enjoy the rest of your evening with your guests. I will be heading home now." I turned and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, a beautiful mixture of confusion, deep humiliation, and complete outrage. I walked through the grand lobby of the restaurant, collected my coat from the front desk, and stepped out into the crisp, cool Chicago night air. As I waited for the valet to bring my car around, the heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open. Barbara marched out, her face twisted in a scowl. She could not let it go. She could not let me walk away having the final word. "You think you are so smart, Fiona," she spat, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "But you just dug your own grave. Spencer is not going to tolerate this kind of financial irresponsibility. You better prepare yourself for the consequences of trying to make him look foolish." I ignored her completely. The valet pulled my car up to the curb. I handed him a generous tip and opened the driver's door. As I slid into the seat, my phone buzzed loudly inside my purse. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Jason, my senior wealth manager at the firm. I opened the message and read the words that would officially mark the beginning of Spencer's complete destruction. Phase 1 complete. Spencer's company accounts have been restricted. Awaiting your next command. I locked my phone, started the engine, and drove away from the steakhouse, leaving Barbara standing on the curb. The war had officially begun, and they had absolutely no idea who they were actually fighting. I drove the rest of the way home in complete silence, the steady hum of the engine the only sound in the car. I parked in the garage, walked into the dark, quiet house, and went straight to the guest bedroom. I locked the door, slid into the cool sheets, and slept better than I had in months. When I walked into the kitchen the next morning, Spencer was already awake. He was pacing the length of the hardwood floor, his face pale and his jaw clenched tight. He looked exhausted, like a man who had spent the entire night staring at a ceiling, calculating his impending doom. The moment he saw me, his anxiety quickly morphed into defensive aggression. He slammed his coffee mug onto the granite island. "What the hell was that card last night, Fiona?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the large room. "Where exactly did you get a limitless corporate black card?" I walked past him, opened the refrigerator, and pulled out the milk for my coffee. I kept my movements slow and deliberate. I knew he was desperate for an explanation. He needed to make sense of the humiliation he had suffered at the steakhouse. I turned around and fed him the carefully constructed half-truth I had prepared. "It is a business expense account," I said smoothly. The nursery secured a new line of corporate credit to handle wholesale distribution and estate landscaping supplies. Spencer stared at me, his eyes widening. He ran a hand over his face, processing the lie. Then, predictably, his greedy, entitled nature took over. The panic about his own frozen accounts vanished, replaced by an aggressive, demanding arrogance. "If your failing plant shop has access to that kind of corporate credit, you need to leverage it for my firm immediately," he commanded, stepping closer to me. "I need a new luxury car, a brand new Mercedes, or an Aston Martin. I am about to finalize a massive real estate merger, Fiona. A CEO cannot be seen driving a 3-year-old sedan to meetings with major developers. You are going to use that card to secure a lease for me today." I looked at him, marveling at his absolute audacity. He had allowed his mother to humiliate me the night before. He had bought his ex-girlfriend a wildly expensive dinner using my money. And now he was demanding I buy him a luxury car to maintain his fake image. "Absolutely not," I replied flatly. "That credit line is strictly for my business inventory. I am not committing fraud to buy you a status symbol." Spencer's face twisted with rage. He slammed his hand against the counter. "You are incredibly selfish, you know that," he shouted. "I work myself to the bone to provide for this family, to build an empire, and the second you get your hands on a little bit of corporate funding, you hoard it. This is exactly why your business is a joke. You do not understand high-level business. You do not understand how wealth is actually generated through presentation and leverage. You are an unsupportive, pathetic wife." I did not flinch. I just took a sip of my coffee. "Are you quite finished?" I asked. Spencer let out a sound of pure disgust. He pulled his phone from his pocket and stormed out of the kitchen, dialing a number as he walked. I could hear him complaining loudly to his mother through the hallway walls, whining about my financial selfishness and my lack of vision. He was giving Barbara the perfect ammunition. He was handing her the exact excuse she needed to launch her next attack. That attack came less than 3 hours later. The front door swung open with a loud bang. I walked into the foyer to find Barbara marching into my house, followed closely by Vanessa. Behind them, two private drivers were struggling to carry 6 massive pieces of designer luggage through the doorway. Vanessa put the back of her hand against her forehead, playing the role of a distressed damsel flawlessly. She let out a dramatic sigh, leaning against the entryway table. Her luxury downtown condo was completely ruined, she claimed. A burst pipe on the floor above had flooded her entire penthouse. The carpets were destroyed, the walls were soaked. She was practically homeless and severely traumatized. Spencer rushed down the stairs, his anger toward me instantly evaporating as he rushed to play the wealthy savior. He threw his arms open, embracing Vanessa, and declared that she was welcome to stay in our fully furnished guest house for as long as she needed. He did not ask me. He did not even look in my direction. He simply handed her the spare keys to the property. Barbara clapped her hands together in delight. She immediately turned her sharp gaze on me, her eyes flashing with vindictive pleasure. She had found a way to punish me for the black card incident. Fiona, she barked, pointing toward the heavy suitcases. Do not just stand there staring. Help the drivers carry Vanessa's bags to the guest house, and make sure you put fresh linens on the bed. Vanessa has highly sensitive skin and cannot sleep on cheap cotton. Then I expect you to prepare a proper breakfast. The poor girl has been through a terrible ordeal and needs a hot meal immediately. I looked at the mountain of luggage. I looked at my husband, who was already leading his ex-girlfriend toward the backyard, carrying nothing but her small handbag. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw my coffee mug. I simply nodded. Of course, Barbara, I said smoothly. I will get right on it. For the next 2 days, Barbara practically moved into our house to tend to her precious guest. She treated me entirely like unpaid staff. She ordered me to brew specific herbal teas, requested fresh towels twice a day, and complained loudly about the quality of the meals I prepared. I complied with every single ridiculous demand. I served them perfectly plated breakfasts and kept my head down, playing the role of the submissive, defeated wife. On the third morning, the absolute height of their audacity presented itself. I was standing at the kitchen island organizing my schedule for the day when Vanessa strolled in from the backyard. She was not wearing her usual designer clothes. Instead, she was wearing one of Spencer's oversized, expensive blue dress shirts. The hem barely reached her mid-thigh. Her hair was perfectly tousled to look like she had just rolled out of bed. She walked right past me, opened the refrigerator and poured herself a glass of the expensive orange juice I had bought specifically for Spencer. She leaned back against the marble counter, crossing her bare legs, and took a slow sip. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. You keep this house very clean, Fiona, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with condescension. It is nice that you have something to occupy your time while your little plant shop struggles to stay afloat. But you know Spencer always preferred women with real ambition. He used to tell me he needed a partner who could match his drive in the corporate world, someone who understood high-level stakes and massive risks. It must be so difficult for him to come home to someone who only knows how to water ferns. She set the glass down on the counter with a sharp clink. Do not worry. I will make sure he stays properly motivated while I am here. She offered a wicked, knowing smile, turned on her bare heel, and sauntered back out toward the guest house, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in her wake. I stood alone in the kitchen. I did not scream. I did not confront my husband about why his ex-girlfriend was wearing his clothes. I wiped the condensation from the counter where she had left her glass. Then I picked up my phone and made a single phone call. I did not call a marriage counselor. I called the elite private security firm that handled the tech infrastructure for my venture capital headquarters. I told my husband I was going to the nursery to do inventory. Instead, I met the lead security contractor at a quiet coffee shop 3 miles away. I handed him the master blueprints to our entire property. I paid him a massive cash retainer and gave him very specific, highly confidential instructions. Spencer had a golf tournament that afternoon, and Barbara was taking Vanessa to a luxury spa to help her recover from her housing trauma. The house would be completely empty for exactly 5 hours. The security team arrived in unmarked vans. They worked with surgical precision. They upgraded the entire smart home network, but they added several undocumented features. They installed high-definition microcameras hidden inside the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, and throughout the guest house. They wired state-of-the-art voice-activated microphones into the crown molding. The equipment was military-grade, entirely undetectable to the naked eye, and completely disconnected from Spencer's personal network. Everything routed directly to an encrypted secure cloud server that only I could access through a biometric lock on my personal phone. When Spencer and his guests returned that evening, the house looked exactly as they had left it. I was standing at the stove stirring a pot of pasta sauce, playing the quiet, obedient wife they all believed me to be. After dinner, I excused myself to take a bath. I locked the bathroom door, turned on the running water, and sat on the edge of the large porcelain tub. I pulled out my phone and opened the newly installed security application. The screen lit up with 12 different high-definition camera feeds. The audio was crystal clear. I tapped the feed for the guest house living room. Vanessa was sitting on the sofa scrolling through her phone. I tapped the main house kitchen feed. Spencer and Barbara were whispering near the refrigerator. I smiled watching them move around my house, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just walked into a heavily monitored cage. They thought I was a foolish, silent maid. They did not realize they had just handed me the keys to their complete and utter destruction. I spent the next 3 days perfecting my performance. I watered the ferns in the living room. I baked fresh blueberry muffins each morning. I even washed and ironed the very same dress shirts my husband's ex-girlfriend was currently parading around my property in. I moved through my own house like a ghost, completely invisible and entirely compliant. They thought they had broken my spirit. They thought I was retreating into submission because I simply had no other options. On Thursday morning, the house finally emptied out. Spencer left before dawn for a commercial site inspection in the suburbs. I packed my canvas tote bag, told Barbara. I was heading to the wholesale district to pick up imported soil for the nursery and walked out the front door. I did not go to the wholesale district. Instead, I drove 3 blocks away, parked my car in the shaded corner of a quiet strip mall parking lot, and locked the doors. I pulled out my phone, bypassed the biometric security lock, and opened the newly installed surveillance application. The dashboard loaded instantly, displaying a grid of 12 high-definition camera feeds. I tapped on the feed labeled Guest House Living Room. The picture quality was breathtakingly sharp. The morning sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of the guest house, illuminating every detail of the space. Barbara and Vanessa were lounging on my expensive white linen sofas. Barbara had prepared a large crystal pitcher of mimosas, and 2 half-empty flutes sat on the glass coffee table between them. The audio feed was so crisp, I could hear the ice clinking against the sides of the pitcher. Vanessa was not wearing her smug, superior smile this morning. She was pacing the length of the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was biting her thumbnails, a nervous habit that completely shattered her refined old money illusion. I just cannot stop thinking about that restaurant, Vanessa said, her voice tight with genuine anxiety. That waiter humiliated me in front of half the city. My father's account has never been frozen before. It is completely unacceptable. Barbara took a leisurely sip of her mimosa, looking entirely unbothered. Oh, Vanessa, please do not fret over a simple banking error. Spencer already told you he spoke to his financial team. The banks are constantly auditing large transactions. It is a minor inconvenience. Spencer will make it up to you, I promise. He is just under a lot of stress with his new corporate merger. Once that goes through, his firm will have millions in liquid capital. Vanessa stopped pacing. She turned to face my mother-in-law, her expression slowly twisting from anxiety into pure, unadulterated panic. She dropped her hands to her sides, her chest heaving. It was not a banking error, Barbara. Vanessa blurted out, her voice cracking. Barbara lowered her champagne flute, her brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean, dear? I leaned forward in my car seat, turning the volume on my phone all the way up. I did not want to miss a single syllable. There is no trust fund. Vanessa confessed the words tumbling out of her mouth, as if she could not hold them in any longer. My father went completely bankrupt 5 years ago. He lost everything in a series of terrible offshore investments. The estate, the cars, the accounts. It is all gone. I have been living on credit cards and personal loans ever since. Barbara sat frozen on the sofa. The color rapidly drained from her face. Her perfectly constructed dream of securing a wealthy high society daughter-in-law was disintegrating right in front of her eyes. "You are lying," Barbara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your family is practically royalty in the real estate market." "They were," Vanessa corrected harshly, her sophisticated facade dropping entirely. "Now we are nothing, and it gets worse. It gets so much worse, Barbara." Vanessa sank onto the edge of the coffee table, burying her face in her hands. "I am completely broke. Worse than broke. I owe people money. Bad people." Barbara sat up completely straight now, the champagne flute trembling slightly in her hand. "What kind of people? How much money?" $150,000. Vanessa sobbed, looking up with tear-filled, desperate eyes. "It is an underground gambling debt. I thought I could win enough to pay off my credit cards, but I just kept losing. The interest is compounding every single week. They have been calling my phone day and night. They told me if I do not pay them by the end of next month, they are going to fine me. That is why I had to move into your guest house. My condo did not flood. I got evicted because I have not paid rent in 6 months." I sat in my car staring at the screen in absolute awe. I already knew Vanessa was broke. My background check had confirmed her father's bankruptcy and her terrible credit score. But I had no idea about the illegal gambling debt. She had handed me a weapon far more destructive than I could have ever anticipated. I watched Barbara process the information. A normal mother would have been horrified. A normal mother would have immediately thrown Vanessa out of the house to protect her son from a desperate, indebted liar. But Barbara was not a normal mother. She was a status-obsessed narcissist, and her hatred for me far outweighed her moral compass. Barbara slowly set her glass down on the table. She looked at Vanessa, her eyes narrowing as she quickly calculated her next move. "Does Spencer know about this?" Barbara asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "No," Vanessa cried, shaking her head violently. "He thinks I am still the wealthy heiress he dated in his 20s. If he finds out I am broke, he will never leave Fiona for me. He will throw me out on the street." Barbara stood up and walked over to Vanessa. She placed a comforting hand on the younger woman's shoulder. I watched the security feed, fascinated by the absolute moral bankruptcy unfolding in my guest house. "He is not going to find out," Barbara said firmly. Vanessa looked up, sniffing loudly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Spencer's firm is about to go public. He is acquiring massive commercial properties downtown. $150,000 is a drop in the bucket for a company of his size." Barbara rationalized, her voice cold and calculating. "Once he divorces that miserable, pathetic plant shop owner, you will be his wife. You will have full access to his corporate accounts. We can quietly siphon the money to pay off your debt, and no one will be the wiser. You will still have the pedigree, and we will still get rid of Fiona." "But he is dragging his feet," Vanessa whined, wiping her eyes. "He keeps saying he needs more time to secure his assets before he files the divorce papers." "I do not have more time, Barbara. Those people are going to hurt me." "Then we force his hand," Barbara declared, her eyes flashing with malicious intent. "We accelerate this timeline. We need to make Fiona look so incredibly unstable and unbearable that Spencer has no choice but to kick her out of the house this week. We will frame her. We will make his life a living hell until he files the paperwork. You just keep playing the perfect supportive partner. I will handle my son." I sat in the front seat of my car, a wide, genuine smile spreading across my face. I was not angry. I was not hurt. I was absolutely thrilled. They thought they were setting a trap for me. They thought they were manipulating the board to secure Spencer's wealth. They had no idea that Spencer did not have any wealth to secure. His company belonged to me. The money they were plotting to steal to pay off a dangerous underground gambling syndicate was my money. I tapped the screen of my phone, navigating to the secure cloud server where the surveillance data was stored. I selected the video file from the last 20 minutes. The high-definition footage, complete with their crystal-clear, undeniable audio confession, was perfectly packaged. I hit the download button. The progress bar zipped across the screen, securing the file directly to my heavily encrypted hard drive. I opened my email application and drafted a new message to David, my lead corporate attorney. David was a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who specialized in hostile corporate takeovers and aggressive asset protection. I attached the video file to the email. I typed a very simple message. David, please review the attached footage. The ex-girlfriend has a $150,000 underground gambling debt. My mother-in-law is actively conspiring to use my husband's corporate assets to pay it off. It is time to initiate the next phase. Draft the preliminary separation agreement immediately. I hit send. I took a deep, refreshing breath of the cool air circulating through the car vents. Barbara and Vanessa wanted to accelerate the divorce. They wanted to rush the legal proceedings so they could get their hands on Spencer's company accounts. I was more than happy to give them exactly what they wanted. I was going to hand them the rope, and I was going to let them tie the knot themselves. I put my car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the nursery. I had to go buy some imported soil after all. I had a role to play, and the curtain was just about to rise on the greatest performance of my life. I arrived at the wholesale nursery supply warehouse just under half an hour later. I bought exactly what I had told Barbara I was going to buy: 4 heavy, cumbersome bags of premium imported potting soil. I loaded them into the trunk of my car by myself, making absolutely sure to get just enough rich, dark dirt on my jeans and across my knuckles to perfectly look the part of the struggling, exhausted plant shop owner. I needed my physical appearance to validate their deeply held assumptions about my pathetic working-class life. When I pulled back into my own driveway, Spencer was standing outside, leaning casually against his freshly detailed luxury sedan. He was on his cell phone, speaking in that loud, boastful, excessively confident voice he reserved exclusively for his subordinates and contractors. Vanessa was draped over the front porch railing like a bored runway model, sipping a sparkling water and watching him with hungry, desperate eyes. She was looking at him the way a starving predator looks at a wounded animal, calculating exactly how much meat she could strip from his bones. I popped the trunk and carried the heavy bags of soil past them one by one, panting slightly, playing the role of the invisible domestic servant to absolute perfection. Neither of them offered to help me hold the door. Spencer did not even pause his phone conversation to acknowledge my presence. Vanessa just wrinkled her nose as I walked by, stepping back as if the mere proximity to manual labor might infect her. That evening, the financial betrayal escalated far beyond expensive dinners. Spencer came home from the office carrying a massive pale orange shopping bag with a highly recognizable ultra-luxury designer logo stamped in gold foil across the front. He bypassed the kitchen, entirely ignoring me, as I stood at the stove chopping vegetables for their dinner, and walked straight out the back door toward the guest house. I did not need to follow him to know what was inside the bag. Thanks to the crisp military-grade audio from my hidden microphones, I heard the entire exchange unfold in real time. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check a recipe, and tuned into the guest house feed. Spencer presented Vanessa with a pristine, limited-edition designer handbag. It was a specific, highly coveted piece of leather craftsmanship that I knew for a fact retailed for no less than $12,500. I listened through my earpiece as Spencer delivered a nauseatingly smooth speech. He told her she deserved something beautiful to hold her things after the severe trauma of losing her luxury downtown condo. He proudly proclaimed that his commercial real estate firm had just recorded its most profitable quarter in history. He promised her that this bag was just the beginning of how he planned to spoil her. I listened as Vanessa squealed in theatrical delight. She praised him relentlessly, feeding his massive ego, telling him what a powerful, uniquely successful man he was. She told him he was a true titan of industry, a man who clearly knew how to treat a woman of high value. I stood in the kitchen stirring the pasta sauce, completely unfazed by the betrayal. Spencer was not a titan of industry. He was a terrible businessman who was entirely reliant on an anonymous benefactor. And I was about to prove exactly how he was paying for that $12,000 leather bag. Later that night, the house finally grew quiet. Spencer and Vanessa were out on the back patio drinking expensive scotch under the stars, while Barbara snored loudly in the master guest suite. I retreated to my home office. It was a small, unassuming room at the end of the hallway filled to the brim with botanical reference books, seed catalogs, and ceramic pots. It was the perfect camouflage. Hidden entirely behind a false wood-paneled wall in my bookshelf was a biometric steel safe. I pressed my thumb to the scanner, opened the heavy door, and pulled out my encrypted primary laptop. I booted up the secure operating system and logged directly into the executive financial portal of my venture capital firm. I navigated through the complex layers of corporate security to the specific portfolio sector, managing my local investments. I clicked on the master file for Spencer's commercial real estate company. 2 years ago, Spencer had been sobbing on the floor of our bedroom, completely ruined. He had over-leveraged his firm on a series of terrible commercial builds. He was days away from total bankruptcy and facing catastrophic personal liability. I could not stand watching my husband humiliate himself, so I used a shell company to step in. I created a proxy entity, a faceless European investment group, to inject the exact amount of cash he needed to survive. In exchange for the financial bailout, my proxy took a 65% equity stake in his entire operation. Spencer signed the paperwork without hesitation. He strutted around for 2 years thinking his undeniable business brilliance had attracted a mysterious, silent billionaire investor. He had absolutely no idea that his savior was sleeping in the bed next to him. I opened the real-time financial ledger for his corporate operating accounts. Because I was the majority shareholder, my terminal had unrestricted real-time access to every single outgoing transaction his executive team processed. My eyes scanned the lines of recent expenditures. It took me less than 30 seconds to find exactly what I was looking for. There it was, logged just 3 hours earlier. A $12,500 charge at an exclusive luxury boutique in the Gold Coast district. I looked at the specific accounting code Spencer had attached to the purchase. He had categorized the designer handbag under client acquisition costs. He was officially claiming his ex-girlfriend's purse as a necessary business expense to reduce his corporate tax burden and hide the spending from his accounting team. I scrolled further back into the ledger, my eyes narrowing as the pattern of blatant fraud revealed itself. There was a $5,000 charge for a weekend yacht rental logged 2 weeks ago, long before Vanessa officially moved into the guest house. Spencer had labeled it as a vendor networking event. There were multiple charges for high-end jewelry, premium champagne deliveries, and luxury car rentals, all expertly buried under columns labeled Business Development, Prospective Buyer Meetings, and Executive Hospitality. He was systematically bleeding his own company dry to maintain the illusion of unlimited personal wealth. He was trying to prove to Vanessa that he could provide the billionaire lifestyle she demanded. But because the company belonged to me, Spencer was not spending his own money. He was spending my operating capital. He was stealing from his own wife to buy affection from a woman who was drowning in illegal gambling debt. The absolute hubris of his actions was almost beautiful. By coding personal luxury gifts for his mistress as corporate expenses, Spencer was not just being a terrible husband. He was committing blatant, undeniable corporate embezzlement. He was violating federal tax laws and breaching his fiduciary duty to his majority shareholder. I thought he was outsmarting a faceless European investment board. He was actually handing me the exact legal ammunition I needed to strip him of everything he had ever built. I exported the entire unredacted financial ledger, downloading every fraudulent receipt and miscoded transaction to a secure file. I cross-referenced the dates and times of the purchases with the location data from his company phone, creating an airtight, undeniable timeline of his theft. I closed the laptop, locked it back inside the biometric safe, and pushed the false bookshelf panel back into place. I walked over to the window and looked out at the backyard. Spencer was leaning against the patio railing, laughing as Vanessa touched his arm. He looked so incredibly smug, so completely satisfied with the web of lies he had spun. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a private unlisted number. The line rang twice before a sharp professional voice answered. It was Harrison, the lead forensic accountant for my venture capital firm. Harrison was a relentless numbers man who treated corporate fraud like a personal insult. Harrison, I need you to initiate a full silent internal audit of our commercial real estate holding here in Chicago, I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly steady. Understood, Harrison replied immediately. Are we looking for systemic accounting errors or targeted executive misconduct? Target the CEO directly, I instructed. I want a complete forensic breakdown of his executive expenditures over the last 6 months. Flag every single transaction coded for client acquisition and business development. Cross-reference the vendor names with luxury retail merchants. Is there a specific timeline for this audit? Harrison asked, the rapid clicking of a keyboard already audible through the speaker. I need an airtight, legally actionable summary report ready by the end of the week, I told him. Do not alert his internal finance team. Pull the data directly through our majority shareholder access port. I want him completely blind to the fact that we are looking at his books. Consider it done, Harrison said. If he is bleeding the operating capital, I will find every single cent. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. The net was officially set. Spencer was treating his company like a personal piggy bank, completely unaware that the bank was about to foreclose on his entire life. He wanted to play the high-rolling executive for his manipulative ex-girlfriend, and his mother wanted to cheer him on from the sidelines. I was going to let them enjoy their stolen luxury bags and their expensive wine for just a few more days. I was going to let them build their glass house as high as they possibly could before I shattered the foundation. The next few days passed in a blur of frantic preparation, though absolutely none of it was mine. Spencer was acting like a man possessed. His commercial real estate firm was hosting its highly anticipated annual charity gala at the end of the week. This event was supposed to be the crowning achievement of his fiscal year. It was designed to project an image of absolute corporate stability and massive wealth to his prospective investors. I knew the truth. I knew his company was hemorrhaging money. I knew Harrison, my forensic accountant, was currently pulling apart Spencer's fraudulent books line by line. But Spencer was entirely focused on the illusion. On the evening of the gala, the atmosphere in my house was suffocating. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing down the skirt of a simple, elegant black evening gown. It was understated and classic. I had no desire to look like a walking billboard for new money. When I walked down the grand staircase, I found my husband, his ex-girlfriend, and my mother-in-law waiting in the foyer. The scene looked like a poorly directed stage play. Spencer was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that I knew for a fact he had expensed to his company just 2 days prior. Vanessa was poured into a shimmering floor-length silver gown covered in hand-sewn crystals. She looked like a human disco ball. She was wearing the $12,000 designer handbag Spencer had bought her, clutching it tightly as if it somehow validated her existence. Barbara stood between them, adjusting Spencer's bow tie with a look of supreme satisfaction. She turned and saw me standing at the bottom of the stairs. Her smile instantly vanished, replaced by her signature scowl. "You are wearing that?" Barbara asked, her eyes raking over my plain black dress. "It looks like you are attending a funeral, Fiona. This is a high society charity event. I think it is perfectly appropriate for the occasion," I replied smoothly. Spencer checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, refusing to make eye contact with me. "Fiona, we have a slight change of plans for the arrival logistics tonight." I clasped my hands in front of me, waiting. I knew whatever was about to come out of his mouth would be an absolute masterclass in cowardice. "The corporate photographer is going to be stationed at the red carpet entrance," Spencer explained, shifting his weight uncomfortably from foot to foot. "The local business magazines are covering the event. I need the optics to be absolutely flawless. Vanessa has agreed to walk the press line with me. She just photographs a bit more like the traditional corporate partner we want to project to the media. It is strictly for public relations purposes." Vanessa offered a fake, apologetic pout. I told him it was a silly idea, Fiona, but Spencer insisted. "My family has such deep ties to the philanthropic community in Chicago. It really just makes the most business sense for his firm if we are seen arriving together. The investors respond so well to my pedigree." Barbara clapped her hands together, effectively ending the fake apologies. "It is settled then. Spencer and Vanessa will take the luxury town car to the main entrance. Fiona, you can order a standard ride share. The venue security will let you in through the service doors at the back of the hotel. We cannot have you confusing the investors by lingering on the red carpet. You can just slip into the ballroom quietly once the dinner service begins. My own husband was forcing me to enter his company gala through the back door with the catering staff, so his bankrupt, gambling-addicted ex-girlfriend could play the role of his wealthy wife for the cameras. Spencer finally looked at me, a brief flash of guilt quickly masked by his towering arrogance. You understand, right, Fiona? It is nothing personal. It is just business. I am trying to secure a massive merger tonight. I need everyone to think I run in the absolute highest circles. I looked at the three of them. They were so thoroughly consumed by their fake image that they could not see the actual billionaire standing right in front of them. I understand perfectly, Spencer, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. It is just business. I turned around, picked up my coat, and ordered a standard rideshare on my phone. I let them walk out the front door and climb into their rented town car. I waited in the quiet foyer until their taillights disappeared down the street. 30 minutes later, my rideshare dropped me off in the cold, damp alleyway behind the luxury hotel. I walked past the massive industrial dumpsters and approached the heavy metal service doors. A harried security guard checked my name against a clipboard, looking slightly confused as to why the CEO's wife was entering through the loading dock. I simply smiled, thanked him for his time, and walked into the bustling hotel kitchen. Dozens of chefs and waitstaff were rushing around carrying silver trays of appetizers and polishing champagne flutes. I walked through the controlled chaos of the service corridors. It was a stark reminder of what real, honest work looked like. The people in this kitchen were earning their living, unlike my husband, who was currently stealing his. My phone vibrated in my clutch. It was a message from Harrison. The forensic audit is moving faster than anticipated. I have isolated $75,000 in fraudulent personal expenses, coded as corporate development, just in the last month. The evidence is catastrophic. I locked my phone and slipped it away. The timing was absolutely flawless. I pushed open the heavy velvet doors and stepped out of the service corridor directly into the glittering grand ballroom. The space was magnificent, filled with towering ice sculptures, massive floral arrangements, and hundreds of Chicago's wealthiest developers and investors. At the front of the room hung a massive silk banner bearing the logo of Spencer's commercial real estate firm, the very firm that I owned. I was standing in a room entirely funded by my own venture capital, watching people drink champagne that my proxy accounts had paid for. I walked over to one of the quieter bars near the edge of the room and ordered a sparkling water. I turned to survey the crowd. It did not take me long to spot them. Spencer and Vanessa were holding court near the center of the ballroom. They were surrounded by a group of highly influential real estate magnates. Spencer was laughing loudly, holding a glass of scotch, acting like the king of the world. Vanessa was clinging to his arm, tossing her hair and flashing her teeth at anyone who looked her way. Then Vanessa spotted me standing alone by the bar. I saw the malicious spark ignite in her eyes. She leaned over, whispered something into Spencer's ear, and then blatantly pointed directly at me. She wanted to finish the job she had started at the steakhouse. She wanted to publicly humiliate me in front of the most powerful people in the city. Vanessa broke away from the group and marched across the ballroom floor, dragging Spencer by the hand. Two of Spencer's most vital clients, a prominent commercial developer named Caldwell and his business partner, followed closely behind them, curious about the sudden movement. Vanessa called out, her voice unnaturally loud, designed to carry over the music and the chatter of the ballroom. "You actually made it. I was so worried you would get lost using the delivery entrance." Mr. Caldwell and his partner looked at me, their eyebrows raised in surprise. Spencer shifted nervously but quickly plastered on his fake, charming smile. "Caldwell, this is my wife, Fiona Spencer," said, his tone incredibly dismissive, as if introducing a distant, slightly embarrassing cousin. Mr. Caldwell offered a polite nod. "A pleasure, Fiona. Your husband has been telling us all about his aggressive expansion plans for the upcoming quarter." Before I could respond, Vanessa positioned herself directly between me and the wealthy developers. She let out a dramatic, sympathetic sigh. "Fiona is just so incredibly brave for showing up tonight," Vanessa announced to the men. "She runs a tiny, struggling little plant shop out in the suburbs. It is a very sweet little hobby, but it is just hemorrhaging money." Spencer is always having to bail her out. It is so stressful for him, but he is just too generous for his own good. Mr. Caldwell shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden personal attack. Spencer did not stop her. He did not tell Vanessa to back down. He just stood there letting his mistress tear down his wife in front of the exact men he was trying to impress. Vanessa reached into her glittering designer handbag, the one my company had paid for, and pulled out a sleek leather checkbook. Since tonight is all about charity and giving back to the less fortunate, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with toxic, sugary sweetness, I want to do my part. My father's trust fund generates so much passive income, it just feels wrong not to help those who are truly drowning. She uncapped a gold pen and hastily scribbled on a check. She ripped it from the book and thrust it toward my chest. Here, Fiona, Vanessa declared loudly. I want to write a check for $500 to your little plant shop. Please consider it a charitable donation from my family to yours. Maybe it will help you keep the lights on for another week. A heavy, agonizing silence fell over our small circle. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, looking deeply embarrassed by the sheer cruelty of the display. And then my husband laughed. Spencer looked at Vanessa, looked at the $500 check hovering in the air, and he actually laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound that completely shattered any lingering illusion that he possessed a shred of human decency. He looked at the powerful developers and shrugged his shoulders. Vanessa just has a heart of gold. Spencer chuckled, gesturing to the check. Go ahead and take it, Fiona. You know the nursery needs all the help it can get right now. We do not want you defaulting on your inventory payments again. He was actively participating in my public execution to elevate his mistress. He was throwing me to the wolves to make himself look like a wealthy, generous titan of industry. I did not reach for the check. I did not break eye contact with Vanessa. I stood perfectly still, a calm, glacial smile spreading across my face. I looked at the $500 piece of paper fluttering in her hand, then I looked directly at Mr. Caldwell. I knew for an absolute fact that Caldwell's latest commercial high-rise project was currently seeking $50 million in Series B funding. I also knew that my venture capital firm was the lead entity reviewing his application. I looked back at Vanessa, my voice smooth, steady, and loud enough for everyone in our circle to hear clearly. Keep your check, Vanessa, I said. It is incredibly generous of you to offer, but I have a strict personal policy. I never accept charitable donations from people who are being actively hunted by underground gambling syndicates for defaulting on $150,000 of illegal debt. The color instantly drained from Vanessa's face. The check slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the ballroom floor. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, his expression shifting from polite discomfort to absolute professional disgust. He looked at Vanessa as if she were a toxic liability, which, financially speaking, she absolutely was. He turned to Spencer, buttoning his suit jacket with a sharp, dismissive movement. I believe we need to mingle with the other guests, Spencer Caldwell said, his voice dropping several degrees in warmth. We will discuss your funding application at another time. Assuming your firm's judgment in personal associations does not reflect your corporate risk management. Caldwell and his partner walked away without waiting for a response, instantly severing Spencer's most critical networking opportunity of the night. Spencer looked like he had been struck by lightning. He whipped his head toward Vanessa, his eyes wide with panic and confusion. Vanessa, what on earth is she talking about? What gambling debt? Vanessa let out a breathless, high-pitched laugh, swatting at Spencer's arm, while her eyes darted nervously around the room. Oh, Spencer, please. Do not tell me you are actually listening to her pathetic, jealous lies. She is just trying to embarrass me because she knows her marriage is over. My father's trust is perfectly fine. I did not stay to listen to the rest of her frantic damage control. I turned on my heel and walked smoothly away, leaving them to navigate the awkward, suffocating tension I had just created. I made my way to the back of the grand ballroom, taking a quiet, shadowed seat at a small cocktail table reserved for overflow guests. It gave me a perfect, unobstructed view of the main stage. The evening's main event was about to begin. The charity silent auction was transitioning into the live bidding portion of the night. The auctioneer, a charismatic man with a booming voice, took the stage to announce the marquee item. It was not a vacation package or a piece of fine art. It was a highly coveted piece of commercial real estate located right in the heart of the downtown tech district, the Montgomery Building. I knew everything there was to know about the Montgomery Building. More importantly, I knew exactly what it meant to my husband. Spencer's entire corporate strategy for the upcoming quarter hinged on acquiring that specific property. His firm was bleeding money, and he had promised his board of directors that he could secure the Montgomery Building at a massive discount through this charity auction. He planned to leverage the property to secure the Series B funding he desperately needed from developers like Caldwell. Without that building, Spencer's quarterly projections were completely worthless. His impending merger would collapse and his firm would be exposed as a hollow shell. I watched from the shadows as Spencer and Vanessa took their seats near the front row. Barbara was sitting right beside them, leaning in to whisper something into Vanessa's ear. Spencer was aggressively rubbing his temples, clearly still stressed from the disastrous encounter with Caldwell. The auctioneer tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are opening the floor for the premier asset of the evening, the historic Montgomery Building. The opening bid is set at $2 million. I watched Vanessa lean over and place her hand on Spencer's knee. I could practically read her lips from across the room. She was telling him not to worry. She was playing the role of the ultimate billionaire savior, promising to buy the building through her family's trust and lease it back to his firm at a fraction of the cost. She was desperate to re-establish her value after I had exposed her gambling debt. "Do we have 2 million?" the auctioneer called out. Vanessa confidently raised her paddle into the air. She smiled brilliantly for the cameras flashing around the room. Spencer let out a visible sigh of relief, gazing at her as if she were an angel sent from heaven. Barbara clapped her hands silently, practically vibrating with joy at the sight of her future daughter-in-law throwing millions of dollars around. 2 million from the lovely lady in the front, the auctioneer announced. "Do I hear 2.5? A paddle went up on the left side of the room. 2.5. "Do I hear 3? Vanessa raised her paddle again, though her smile looked a fraction tighter this time. 3 million, the auctioneer declared. Another developer in the middle row raised his paddle. 3.5. I watched Vanessa's body language change. The casual, wealthy arrogance was evaporating with every second that passed. She knew she did not have $3 to her name, let alone 3 million. She had raised her paddle purely for the optics, fully expecting to win the opening bid, and then figure out a way to fake a bank transfer later. But the price was climbing rapidly, and her non-existent credit limits were officially terrifying her. If she won this auction and failed to produce the funds, she would be investigated for federal wire fraud. "Do I hear 4 million?" the auctioneer asked, looking directly at Vanessa. Spencer nudged her arm, nodding encouragingly. "Go ahead," I heard him whisper. "Your dad's trust can easily cover 4. Vanessa swallowed hard. A bead of sweat formed on her forehead. She slowly raised her paddle, her hand shaking slightly. 4 million, the auctioneer boomed. "Do we have 4.5? The developer in the middle row immediately raised his paddle. 4.5 million. The auctioneer pointed back to Vanessa. 5 million to you, ma'am. Do we have 5 million? Vanessa froze. She looked at the auctioneer, then looked down at her lap. She let out a fake dramatic sigh and dropped her paddle onto the table. She leaned over to Spencer and whispered a frantic excuse. I knew exactly what she was saying. She was claiming her wealth manager had just texted her advising that the property was not a sound investment at that price point. She was playing the role of the prudent strategic heiress gracefully bowing out of a bad deal. Spencer's face fell. Absolute devastation washed over his features. He stared at her droptle, realizing his one and only chance to save his failing firm was slipping through his fingers. He did not have the capital to bid himself. His corporate accounts were frozen and his personal credit was maxed out. He was completely powerless. 4.5 million going once the auctioneer called out, raising his gavel. I took a quiet sip of my sparkling water. I set the glass down, picked up the numbered paddle resting on my small table, and raised it smoothly into the air. 5 million, the auctioneer shouted, pointing directly to the back of the room. We have 5 million from paddle number 42. Every head in the grand ballroom turned to look at the back row. I was sitting in the shadows, my face partially obscured by a massive floral arrangement. I had intentionally registered my paddle under the name of Vanguard Holdings, the anonymous proxy, LLC, I used for all my major real estate acquisitions. Spencer whipped his head around frantically trying to see who had just outbid the entire room in cash. He strained his neck, but he could not see me through the crowd and the dim lighting. The developer in the middle row hesitated, checked his phone, and shook his head. He was out. 5 million going once the auctioneer announced, his voice vibrating with excitement. 5 million going twice. Sold. Sold for $5 million to the representative of Vanguard Holdings. The ballroom erupted into polite, restrained applause. I calmly lowered my paddle and slipped it into my purse. I had just purchased a multi-million-dollar commercial property in cash without breaking a sweat. It was a drop in the bucket for my venture capital portfolio, but it was the entire world to my husband. I watched the scene unfolding in the front row. Spencer had physically slumped in his chair. He had his head in his hands, completely devastated. His entire corporate strategy, his merger, his future was gone. Without the Montgomery building, he had nothing to offer his investors. He was a dead man walking in the financial sector. Vanessa was frantically rubbing his shoulder, trying to soothe his bruised ego while maintaining her own fragile illusion of wealth. Barbara looked completely baffled, whispering angrily to Vanessa about who this mysterious Vanguard Holdings could possibly be. They were complaining about foreign billionaires coming into Chicago and buying up all the prime real estate. They were cursing the anonymous corporate buyer who had just stolen Spencer's crown jewel right out from under him. They had absolutely no idea that the foreign billionaire they were cursing was the exact same woman they had forced to walk through the service entrance 2 hours ago. They thought they had successfully pushed me to the margins of their high society world. They did not realize that by sending me to the back of the room, they gave me the perfect vantage point to checkmate his entire existence. I stood up from my small table, smoothing down the front of my black dress. I did not need to stay for the dessert service. I had gotten exactly what I came for. I walked quietly out the back doors of the ballroom, slipping through the service corridors, and out into the cool night air. The city lights sparkled against the dark sky. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to David, my corporate attorney. The Montgomery building has been acquired under Vanguard Holdings. Add it to the portfolio. Spencer's quarterly projections are now officially obsolete. I stepped into a waiting private town car, leaving my husband trapped in a ballroom funded by my money, mourning the loss of a building I now owned while sitting next to a broke mistress who could not afford to buy him a cup of coffee. The illusion of his wealth was dead. Now it was time to tear down the rest of his life. The plush, deep crimson carpeting of the hotel corridors absorbed the sharp clicking of my heels. Behind me, the muffled roar of the charity auction and the clinking of champagne glasses faded into a dull, insignificant hum. I had just single-handedly dismantled my husband's entire corporate future with a single raise of a numbered paddle, and my heart was beating with a steady, rhythmic calm. I did not feel the erratic pulse of a scorned wife or the panic of a woman losing her marriage. I felt the absolute icy clarity of an apex predator circling its prey. I needed to retrieve my coat. The Chicago air outside was dropping well below freezing, and the adrenaline that had kept my blood pumping during the intense bidding war was slowly giving way to a bone-deep chill. I navigated the labyrinth of mirrored hallways leading toward the VIP coat check near the east exit of the venue. The hotel staff had concentrated their efforts in the main ballroom to manage the dessert service, leaving this particular wing beautifully deserted. As I rounded the corner toward the heavy mahogany double doors of the coat room, a familiar, frantic voice stopped me dead in my tracks. It was Spencer. His tone was a pathetic, grating mixture of absolute desperation and severely bruised ego. I pressed myself flat against the silk wallpaper, stepping seamlessly into the deep shadow cast by a massive marble pillar. I do not understand what just happened in there. Spencer was pacing his dress shoes, scuffing aggressively against the polished floor. Vanguard Holdings. Who the hell is Vanguard Holdings? My broker assured me we had zero competition for the Montgomery building. He swore to me the property was a guaranteed lock. That building was the keystone for the entire upcoming merger, Vanessa. Without it, my quarterly projections are completely gutted. My board of directors is going to demand answers I do not have. Spencer, please calm down, Vanessa cooed. I could hear the heavy rustle of her crystal-covered dress as she moved closer to him in the confined space. You are a brilliant CEO. You are a visionary. You will find another building that is 10 times better. My father's trust can easily pivot to back a different commercial development. We just need to reorganize our strategy. She was lying through her teeth, desperately trying to maintain her illusion of boundless wealth. She did not have a trust fund. She had a $150,000 gambling debt and a target on her back. And Spencer, blinded by his own arrogance and desperation, was swallowing her lies without chewing. I heard the sound of their footsteps shuffling closer together. I need you, Vanessa, Spencer whispered, his voice dropping into that intimately manipulative register he used to use on me when we first met. This entire night has been an absolute unmitigated nightmare. That humiliating scene with Caldwell losing the bid to some faceless corporate entity, having Fiona wandering around looking like a miserable, embarrassing shadow. I cannot take it anymore. I need to be with a woman who actually belongs in this world. I need to be with someone who understands power. The distinct, unmistakable sound of a heavy, desperate kiss echoed from the coat room. It was the sound of a decade of marriage being casually thrown into the garbage. My stomach did not drop. My eyes did not fill with hot, blinding tears. My breathing did not hitch. I simply reached into my black clutch and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the voice memo application and hit the bright red record button. I held the device perfectly still in the shadows, capturing every single word of my husband's ultimate betrayal. I watched the audio waveforms spike and fall on the screen, translating his infidelity into cold, hard digital data. I just need a little more time, Spencer murmured, pulling away from the kiss slightly. His breathing was heavy. Give me a month, Vanessa. I promise you, I am going to leverage Fiona's name off the house deed. I have my private lawyers drawing up a creative equity split right now to protect my personal assets. I am moving funds around, so she cannot touch a single dime of what I have built. Once the new merger goes through and I take the company public, I am going to leave her with absolutely nothing. She will be lucky to walk away with that failing plant shop. And then it is just you and me. A month is a long time, Spencer, Vanessa replied, her voice laced with a subtle, very real panic. My family is getting impatient. We need to merge our assets sooner rather than later to secure the capital for your next move. 30 days. I swear it on my life, Spencer vowed, completely unaware that he was sealing his own doom. We will be sipping champagne on a yacht in Monaco, and Fiona will be back to potting dirt where she belongs. I stared at the glowing red timer on my phone screen. 45 seconds of recorded audio. 45 seconds that completely shattered the remaining legal protections of our marriage. He was actively plotting to commit severe marital asset fraud. He was planning to forge equity documents to steal my house, the house I had secretly paid the mortgage on for the last year, and leave me destitute. He wanted to strip me of everything. A weaker woman would have burst through those mahogany doors. A weaker woman would have screamed, thrown her purse, slapped him across the face, and demanded a tearful explanation. But I was not a weak woman. I was a ruthless venture capitalist, and Spencer had just handed me the legal equivalent of a loaded gun. His desperate promise to merge his assets with Vanessa was the exact piece of evidence I needed. My corporate attorney, David, was currently drafting a preliminary separation agreement, loaded with a highly specific commingled debt clause. This audio recording proved Spencer's intent to merge his finances with his mistress, ensuring that when the trap finally sprang, he would legally absorb every single penny of her underground gambling debt. I stopped the recording, saved the audio file to my encrypted secure folder, and immediately forwarded a copy to David. I did not need my code anymore. The fire burning in my chest was more than enough to keep me warm. I turned away from the coat room, leaving Spencer and Vanessa to their pathetic, deceitful romance. Let him promise her the moon. Let her promise him a non-existent billionaire bailout. They were two sinking ships violently clinging to each other in the dark, completely oblivious to the fact that the ocean they were drowning in belonged entirely to me. I walked swiftly down the service corridor, my posture perfectly straight, and pushed through the heavy metal exit doors. The freezing Chicago wind whipped through my hair as I stepped out onto the damp pavement of the loading dock. My private town car was already waiting at the curb, the engine idling smoothly in the quiet alleyway. The driver, a polite older man named Thomas, stepped out and opened the rear door for me. "Take me home, Thomas," I said quietly. I slid into the warm leather seat. I watched the glittering lights of the luxury hotel fade into the distance as we pulled away from the curb. My phone vibrated heavily in my hand. It was an email from David confirming receipt of the audio file. He had attached a single terrifying sentence. "Marital fraud established and documented. The preliminary separation traps are fully primed." I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city blur past. Spencer thought he had a month to execute his master plan. He thought he had 30 days to steal my life and hand it to his mistress. He did not even have 12 hours. By the time the sun came up tomorrow morning, his corporate paradise was going to burn straight to the ground. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a genuine, deeply peaceful smile. The final phase was officially in motion. I woke up the next morning feeling more rested than I had in a decade. I went downstairs, brewed a fresh pot of French roast coffee, and stood by the kitchen island waiting for the delivery I knew was coming. The house was quiet, heavy with the aftermath of the disastrous charity gala. At exactly 8 in the morning, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the foyer. Spencer shuffled out of the master bedroom wearing his expensive silk bathrobe. He was nursing a massive hangover, rubbing his temples and squinting against the bright morning light. He grumbled under his breath as he opened the front door to find a uniformed legal courier standing on the porch. The courier handed him a thick certified envelope sealed with red tape requiring a direct signature. Spencer signed the clipboard carelessly, tossing the pen back to the courier. He closed the door and tore open the heavy envelope right there in the hallway. I leaned against the marble counter, taking a slow sip of my coffee, and watched his entire world implode. I saw his eyes scan the first page. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. His hands started to shake so violently that the thick stack of legal documents rattled in the quiet room. He staggered backward, his shoulders hitting the wall as he gasped for air. I was reading the official legally binding notice of a forensic audit initiated by his anonymous majority shareholder. The letter, drafted flawlessly by my attorney David, pulled no punches. It explicitly detailed the discovery of $75,000 in missing operational capital, all illegally categorized under fraudulent client acquisition costs, just within the last 30 days. The notice stated clearly that if the embezzled funds were not immediately accounted for and returned, the shareholder would bypass standard civil litigation and hand the findings directly to federal authorities for criminal prosecution. Spencer dropped the papers onto the hardwood floor. He grabbed his hair, pulling at the roots as a high-pitched, panicked sound escaped his throat. He was pacing the length of the foyer in erratic, jerky movements, muttering frantically about going to federal prison. He knew exactly what he had done. He knew he had stolen corporate funds to buy luxury handbags and vintage wine for his mistress. And he knew that the faceless billionaire who owned his company was about to lock him in a cage for it. I did not even look at me. He completely ignored the wife standing in the kitchen and bolted toward the back door, running out across the lawn toward the guest house. He was desperate for a lifeline. I calmly set my coffee mug down, picked up my phone, and opened my secure surveillance application. I tapped into the audio and video feeds for the guest house living room, slipping a wireless earbud into my ear. I did not want to miss a single second of the performance. Spencer burst through the doors of the guest house completely unhinged. Vanessa was sitting on the sofa, filing her nails. She jumped as he ran toward her, dropping to his knees on the rug. He laid out the absolute disaster, his voice cracking with pure terror. He confessed that his silent investor was auditing him, that they had found the fraudulent charges, and that he was facing imminent jail time for the money he had spent trying to impress her. He begged her for help. He told her he needed a massive injection of cash immediately to cover his tracks before the auditors handed the file to the authorities. I watched Vanessa freeze on the screen. She was backed into an impossible corner. She knew she was drowning in a $150,000 gambling debt. She knew she was completely broke. But she also knew that if Spencer went to prison, her only meal ticket would vanish, and the dangerous people hunting her would find her. Terrified of losing her grip on his remaining assets, Vanessa spun the most spectacular, desperate lie of her entire life. She reached out, cupping Spencer's sweating face in her hands, and put on a mask of pure, untroubled confidence. "Oh, Spencer, darling, please breathe," she cooed, her voice steady and sickeningly sweet. "This is just a minor corporate hurdle. I told you my family understands high-level business. I will call my father right now. I will have him liquidate one of his offshore trust accounts and buy out this angry shareholder entirely. We will pay back whatever they think is missing, and my father will take over the equity. You will answer to us, and we will save your company by the end of the week." Spencer sobbed with relief. He buried his face in her lap, kissing her hands, calling her his absolute savior, his angel, the only woman who truly understood his worth. He believed every single word of her ridiculous fantasy. He was ready to hand the keys to his company over to a woman who could not even afford to buy a cup of coffee. Barbara, having heard the commotion from the main house, had followed Spencer out to the guest house. I watched on the camera feed as she stood in the doorway listening to Vanessa promise a multi-million-dollar bailout. Barbara's chest puffed out, her ego inflated to astronomical proportions. She looked at Vanessa like a deity who had just descended from the heavens to bless their family. Barbara did not stay to comfort her weeping son. Armed with the false assurance of a billionaire rescue, she marched straight back across the lawn and through the back door of the main house. I quickly pulled the earbud from my ear and turned back to the stove, pretending to wipe down the spotless counters. Barbara stormed into the kitchen. She did not walk. She paraded. She squared her shoulders, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. Her face was twisted into a sneer of absolute triumphant malice. "Pack your bags," Fiona Barbara commanded, her voice ringing with toxic satisfaction. "Your time in this house is officially over. Vanessa's family is stepping in to buy out Spencer's investors. She is saving my son's legacy and protecting his empire. She is the kind of woman he always deserved. You are completely obsolete. I want you out of this property by the end of the week." I looked at my mother-in-law. I looked at the sheer blinding arrogance radiating from her face. She thought she had won. She thought she was discarding a pathetic, useless daughter-in-law to make way for a high society heiress. She had absolutely no idea that the empire she was so desperate to protect was currently resting in the palm of my hand. It was time for my finest performance yet. I let my lower lip tremble. I widened my eyes, forcing a look of utter, devastating heartbreak to wash over my features. I took a shaky breath, letting genuine tears well up and spill over my cheeks. I slumped my shoulders, making myself look as small, broken, and defeated as physically possible. "You cannot be serious, Barbara," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. "I have supported him for 5 years. I have given him everything I have." Barbara laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "You gave him nothing, Fiona. You dragged him down. And now he is finally free to soar. Get your things out of my son's house." I buried my face in my hands, letting out a soft, pathetic sob. I cried for the death of my marriage. I wept for the cruel injustice of being cast aside. I played the role of the discarded, helpless wife so convincingly that Barbara actually turned her back on me in disgust, completely satisfied with her brutal victory. When Spencer finally walked back into the kitchen 10 minutes later, he was riding the high of his false salvation. He looked at me crying by the sink and did not show a single ounce of remorse. He just looked annoyed by the inconvenience of my emotions. "Spencer," I whispered, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "Your mother said Vanessa's family is buying your company. She said you want me gone." Spencer crossed his arms, standing tall. "It is true, Fiona. Vanessa is securing a massive buyout. We are moving in a different direction. It is just business." I let out another heavy, trembling sigh. "I am so tired of fighting, Spencer," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. "If you truly want to be with her, I will not stand in your way anymore. I just want to leave quietly. I will step aside and sign preliminary divorce documents today to speed up the process. We can separate the assets later." I just want to get out of your way. Spencer's eyes lit up with unadulterated greed. He had expected a long, drawn-out legal battle. He had expected me to fight for the house and demand alimony. The fact that I was voluntarily offering to sign preliminary separation papers immediately was the greatest gift he could have asked for. He thought I was rolling over and surrendering. That sounds like the most mature decision you have made in years, Fiona Spencer said, failing to hide his massive, eager smile. I will have my lawyers draft up standard separation papers this afternoon. We can get this done quickly and cleanly. I nodded, wiping away a final fake tear. You do that, Spencer. Let's make it quick. I turned and walked slowly up the stairs to our bedroom, maintaining my slumped, defeated posture until I was safely behind the closed door. Once the lock clicked into place, the tears vanished instantly. I stood up perfectly straight, walking over to my vanity mirror. I looked at my reflection and smiled. Spencer thought he was rushing the divorce to secure his new billionaire lifestyle. He had no idea that the paperwork my attorney David was currently drafting contained a highly specific, totally lethal, commingled debt clause. By rushing to sign preliminary separation documents without a proper asset discovery period, Spencer was about to legally absorb all of his new partner's undisclosed debts. He was about to unknowingly chain himself to a $150,000 illegal gambling deficit. I wiped a smudge of mascara from my cheek. The trap was fully set, the bait was taken, and my husband was happily sprinting straight toward the edge of the cliff. The drive to downtown Chicago. The following morning was brisk and clear. I parked my car in the underground garage of one of the most prestigious legal high-rises in the city. My attorney David was waiting for me in his corner office overlooking the river. David was a shark in a tailored suit. He handled hostile corporate takeovers for my venture capital firm, and he approached divorce law with the exact same level of ruthless precision. I sat down in the leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. He slid a thick stack of freshly printed legal documents toward me. A dark, amused smile played at the corners of his mouth. "It is a masterpiece of legal self-destruction," David said, tapping the top page with his silver pen. "I drafted the preliminary separation agreement exactly as you requested. On the surface, it looks like a standard, highly aggressive fast-track divorce. It explicitly states that you are surrendering all rights to claim any future equity in his commercial real estate firm. It also grants him immediate exclusive occupancy of the primary residence." I picked up the document and scanned the first few pages. "He is going to read this and think he just won the lottery," I said. "He thinks I am walking away from his entire corporate empire because I am too heartbroken to fight him in court. He has no idea the company is already sitting in my portfolio." David leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "The surrender of corporate equity is just the shiny object to distract him. The real weapon is buried on page 42, Section 4, Paragraph B, the commingled liability clause." I flipped to the back of the heavy packet and found the specific section. It was buried under a mountain of mind-numbing, dense legal jargon about temporary asset allocation and household maintenance. "Explain how this triggers," I instructed. David pointed to the paragraph. "By signing this fast-track separation agreement, Spencer is demanding a total immediate severing of your shared financial liability. However, the law requires that he maintain a distinct, isolated financial household during the mandatory waiting period before the divorce is finalized. I have added a highly specific stipulation. If Spencer establishes a cohabitating partnership and commingles any personal or corporate finances with his new partner before the final decree is signed by a judge, he legally assumes full responsibility for all of her undisclosed liabilities." I looked up at David, the sheer brilliance of the trap settling over me. Because he is rushing to sever his ties with me, to secure Vanessa's fake billionaire bailout, he is legally tying himself to her completely. "Exactly," David confirmed. "The moment he pays for her living expenses, the moment he allows her to use his corporate accounts, or the moment they sign any joint agreement to save his failing firm, their finances are legally merged. And because Vanessa has a $150,000 underground gambling debt, Spencer will instantly legally absorb that entire deficit. The creditors will be able to come after him directly." It was a flawless, absolutely lethal legal snare. Spencer's boundless greed and his desperate need to replace me with a wealthy heiress were going to be the exact mechanisms of his downfall. He was so eager to kick me out of the house and secure Vanessa's non-existent trust fund that he would never take the time to read the fine print. Print 3 copies, I told David. I will tell him I am ready to sign them tomorrow. When I returned home later that afternoon, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from hostile to celebratory. Spencer and Vanessa were sitting at the kitchen island, drinking expensive champagne in the middle of a Tuesday. They were openly reviewing paint swatches and fabric samples. Vanessa was actively planning how she was going to redecorate my master bedroom the second I was gone. Spencer looked up as I walked into the kitchen. He did not bother to hide his massive, arrogant grin. He stood up and puffed out his chest, looking down his nose at me. "Fiona, I spoke to my legal team this morning." Spencer announced, his tone dripping with fake corporate authority. "They told me a standard asset separation requires a 30-day discovery period. I told them that timeline is completely unacceptable. I am in the middle of a massive corporate acquisition. I cannot have my personal assets tied up in legal limbo. I want this done by Friday." Vanessa took a slow sip of her champagne, watching me with a smug, victorious sneer. "Spencer and my father are moving very quickly on the company buyout, Fiona. We really need you to clear out so we can focus on saving his legacy. It is just business." I let my shoulders slump forward. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the granite countertop, playing the role of the defeated, exhausted wife to absolute perfection. "You do not have to wait for your lawyers, Spencer," I said quietly, letting my voice waver, just enough to sound thoroughly broken. "I went to see a mediator this morning. I had them draft a preliminary separation agreement. It gives you exclusive rights to the house immediately. It also waives any claim I might have to your real estate firm. I do not want your money. I just want to leave and have some peace." Spencer's eyes widened in genuine shock. He looked at Vanessa, a greedy, triumphant spark flashing across his face. He could not believe his luck. He thought he had bullied me into a total unconditional surrender. "You are waiving your rights to my company?" he asked, trying to keep the giddy excitement out of his voice. I nodded slowly. "I know how much the firm means to you. I know Vanessa's family is going to help you take it to the next level. I will not stand in your way. We can sign the papers tomorrow morning. You can have the house all to yourself by Friday afternoon." Spencer let out a loud, breathless laugh. He walked over and slapped his hand hard on the kitchen counter. "See, Fiona, this is exactly what I have been talking about. If you had just shown this kind of practical, mature business sense during our marriage, things might have been different. But this is for the best. Bring the papers to my downtown office tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Let's get this over with." The next morning, I walked into the glass-enclosed conference room of Spencer's commercial real estate firm. It was a beautiful, expansive office suite that my venture capital money was currently paying the lease on. David walked in beside me carrying his sleek leather briefcase. Spencer was already sitting at the long glass table. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy and sheer excitement. Sitting next to him was a young, very nervous-looking junior attorney. Spencer had clearly bullied a low-level associate from his legal department into reviewing the documents because his senior counsel had likely refused to rush the process. David slid the thick stack of separation documents across the glass table. Spencer immediately grabbed a gold fountain pen from his breast pocket. It was another expensive gift from Vanessa, no doubt purchased with my stolen corporate funds. He flipped straight to the signature page at the very back of the packet. The junior attorney reached out, placing a hesitant hand over the documents. "Mr. Sterling, please wait. I really need to advise you to slow down. I have only had an hour to review these files. The opposing counsel has included several highly aggressive clauses regarding asset liability, specifically in Section 4, Paragraph B. There is a commingled debt stipulation that I find very concerning. If you share any financial burdens with a new partner before the final decree." Spencer ripped the document out from under the junior attorney's hand with a sharp, angry scoff. "I do not pay you to be a coward," Spencer snapped, glaring at the young man. "I pay you to facilitate my business. Do you have any idea what is at stake right now? My new investors are ready to wire millions of dollars to secure the Montgomery building loss. I am not letting a minor legal technicality hold up the biggest merger of my career. She is walking away from my company and handing me the house. That is all that matters. But sir, the liability absorption is incredibly risky. If your new partner has any undisclosed financial, I know exactly what I am doing. Spencer interrupted, his voice echoing loudly in the glass room. He looked at me, a cruel, mocking sneer twisting his features. He thought he was the smartest man in the entire city. He thought he was outmaneuvering a simple plant shop owner. My new partner comes from a family with more money than this entire firm combined, Spencer boasted to the terrified junior lawyer. Her assets are impeccable. Now sit back and watch how a real executive closes a deal. Spencer slammed the document down on the table, clicked his gold pen, and aggressively signed his name on the dotted line. He initialed every single page, legally binding himself to the contract. He pushed the packet back across the table toward me. Your turn, Fiona. Sign it and get out of my life. I want you completely packed and out of my house by noon tomorrow. Vanessa is throwing a victory brunch for her friends, and I do not want your depressing energy ruining the atmosphere. I picked up the pen. I looked at my husband's smug, arrogant face. I looked at the signature that had just tied him to a violent underground gambling syndicate. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that caused the smugness to falter on his face for just a fraction of a second. I signed my name. David collected the documents and placed them safely into his briefcase. I will be out of your house by noon tomorrow, Spencer, I promised smoothly. Enjoy your victory brunch. I truly hope it is everything you deserve. I drove back to the house the following morning. The neighborhood was usually quiet on a Thursday, filled with the sounds of landscaping crews and delivery trucks. Today, however, a line of expensive luxury SUVs cluttered the street in front of my driveway. I parked my car near the curb and stepped out. The heavy thumping of loud, obnoxious pop music echoed from my backyard patio. Vanessa had wasted absolutely no time. She had officially moved her things into the master bedroom the second Spencer left for his office. To celebrate her perceived victory, she was throwing a lavish victory brunch for her circle of fake high society friends. As I walked up the paved driveway, a splash of color caught my eye. Scattered across the pristine green grass of my front lawn were dozens of my personal garments. Vanessa had literally opened my closet windows and tossed my sweaters, my skirts, and my winter coats straight out onto the yard. A group of women holding crystal champagne flutes stood on the front porch. They were laughing hysterically, pointing down at my discarded clothes. Vanessa stood at the center of the group, wearing a silk robe that belonged to my husband. She raised her glass in a mocking toast as I approached. "Look who finally showed up to collect her trash!" Vanessa called out loudly, making sure her friends heard every word. I needed to clear out the closet space, Fiona. My designer wardrobe simply requires a lot more room than your pathetic collection of denim and flannel. You should probably hurry up and pack. We are having the house professionally deep cleaned this afternoon to get rid of the smell of cheap soil. Barbara stepped out onto the porch, joining the chorus of cruel laughter. She looked at my clothes on the lawn with an expression of pure disgust. "It is about time we brought some actual class into this neighborhood," Barbara declared. "Do not just stand there staring, Fiona. Pick up your rags and get off my son's property. He is finally going to have the life he deserves." I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not fall to my knees and weep over my ruined clothes. I knew exactly what this display was meant to do. They wanted me to break down. They wanted to feel powerful by making me feel small. I simply looked at the garments on the grass, identified the few items that actually held sentimental value, and picked them up. The rest of the clothes were completely meaningless to me. I had millions of dollars in liquid capital waiting in offshore accounts. I could buy a completely new wardrobe in Paris tomorrow if I wanted to. I placed the folded items into the trunk of my car. I closed the trunk with a soft click and walked right past the group of cackling women on the porch. I stepped into the foyer of the house. The interior was already being stripped of my presence. The framed photographs of Spencer and me had been violently shoved into a cardboard box by the door. The subtle, calming botanical scents I used to keep the house smelling fresh had been replaced by the overwhelming toxic stench of Vanessa's heavy floral perfume. I walked up the grand staircase to the master bedroom to retrieve my essential documents and my encrypted laptop from the hidden safe. The bedroom was completely unrecognizable. Vanessa had exploded her cheap, flashy luggage all over the expensive hardwood floors. Designer shoeboxes and empty shopping bags littered the room. She was nesting. She was aggressively claiming her territory, completely unaware that she was moving into a house that I personally held the mortgage on. I bypassed her mess, opened my false bookshelf panel, and retrieved my biometric safe. I placed my laptop and my legal folders securely into my canvas tote bag. I took one last look around the room where I had spent the last 5 years of my life. It did not feel like a loss. It felt like walking out of a prison cell after the warden had carelessly left the door wide open. I walked back down the stairs carrying my single tote bag. Vanessa and Barbara had moved their victory brunch into the main kitchen. They were snacking on imported caviar and drinking expensive champagne that Spencer had undoubtedly billed to his corporate account. Vanessa looked me up and down, her eyes flashing with a predatory, vicious delight. "Leaving so soon, Fiona," she mocked, leaning against the marble island. "I thought you might want to stay and help the catering staff clean up. It is the only kind of work you are actually qualified for anyway." Barbara let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Let her go, Vanessa. She needs to get back to her miserable little life. She has a lot of plants to water." I stopped by the front door. I turned around and looked directly at the two women who had made it their absolute mission to destroy me. They looked so incredibly smug. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect coup. They thought Vanessa was going to marry Spencer, pay off her massive gambling debt with his corporate wealth, and live happily ever after in this sprawling suburban mansion. They did not know that Spencer had just signed a legally binding document that forced him to absorb every single penny of that violent underground debt. They did not know that Spencer's company accounts were completely frozen by my venture capital firm. And they certainly did not know that I owned the very floorboards they were currently standing on. I looked at Barbara and Vanessa with an expression of complete, terrifying serenity. "Enjoy the house," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly level. "I truly hope you can afford the upkeep." I turned my back on them, walked out the front door, and stepped into the crisp afternoon air. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove slowly down the street. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The house grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared from view entirely. I had successfully executed a flawless tactical retreat. I was letting them think they had won the war, allowing their massive egos to blind them to the catastrophic ambush waiting just around the corner. The rest of Thursday passed with agonizing slowness. I spent the evening in a luxury suite at a downtown boutique hotel, drinking a glass of sparkling water and reviewing the final corporate documents with my attorney David. We double-checked every single line of the forensic audit. The evidence of Spencer's aggressive embezzlement was irrefutable. His career was officially over. Friday morning arrived with brilliant, piercing sunlight. It was the day of the emergency board meeting. It was the day the anonymous majority shareholder had demanded a full accounting of the missing corporate funds. I sat in the back of my private town car as my driver navigated the busy morning traffic toward the financial district. I was wearing a $5,000 tailored power suit, a sharp, pristine white silk blouse, and the custom-engraved vintage pocket watch I had originally bought for Spencer's anniversary gift. It felt like the perfect accessory for an execution. Across town, Spencer was preparing for the most important meeting of his entire life. I knew exactly how he would approach it. He would be wearing his absolute best Italian suit. He would have his hair perfectly styled. He would be radiating an aura of untouchable, arrogant confidence. He firmly believed that he was walking into that boardroom to simply pacify an angry investor before introducing Vanessa's billionaire father as his ultimate corporate savior. Spencer pulled his luxury sedan into the executive parking garage of his towering commercial real estate building. He walked into the grand glass lobby with Vanessa clinging tightly to his arm. Vanessa was wearing a conservative, elegant business dress, playing the role of the refined, wealthy heiress who was about to rescue his legacy. They stepped into the private executive elevator, riding it all the way up to the top floor. Spencer probably kissed her cheek. He probably told her that today was the first day of their new, incredibly wealthy life together. He had the signed preliminary divorce papers sitting in his leather briefcase, thinking they were his golden ticket to absolute freedom. Spencer and Vanessa walked down the long carpeted hallway toward the main corporate boardroom. Spencer greeted his terrified administrative staff with a bright, easy smile. He told his receptionist to hold all of his calls. He was ready to meet the furious majority shareholder. He was ready to unveil his brilliant strategy and secure his empire once and for all. He reached out and pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom, stepping confidently into the room, entirely unaware that he was walking directly into his own grave. Spencer practically glided into the corporate boardroom, his chest puffed out and his arms securely wrapped around Vanessa. The room was a massive expanse of glass and polished steel, overlooking the Chicago skyline. Seated around the long table were the 5 senior members of his board of directors, including Chairman Sterling. They did not look up with the usual welcoming smiles Spencer was accustomed to. Their faces were carved from stone. Spencer pulled out a leather chair for Vanessa, treating her like royalty. He took his place near the head of the table, unbuttoning his suit jacket with a practiced, arrogant flourish. He clapped his hands together once. "Good morning, gentlemen," Spencer said, his voice booming with false authority. "I know an emergency audit sounds alarming, but I can assure you it is nothing more than a minor administrative oversight. Before we get into the numbers, I want to formally introduce you to my new partner, Vanessa. Her family is prepared to step in with substantial capital to resolve any outstanding issues with our silent majority shareholder. We are looking at a complete buyout by the end of the day." The room remained dead silent. None of the board members even glanced at Vanessa. Chairman Sterling folded his hands on the glass table. "Mr. Sterling," the chairman said, his voice cold and devoid of any pleasantries, "you are not running this meeting. We are waiting for the chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings to arrive. She requested that no business be discussed until she took the floor." Spencer frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption to his grand performance. "Vanguard Holdings, fine. Where is this mysterious billionaire then? I have a very busy schedule today, and my new investors are waiting on my call." Right on cue, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the boardroom swung open. I walked into the room. I was not wearing my gardening apron or denim jeans. I was wearing a $5,000 razor-sharp midnight blue tailored power suit. My hair was styled perfectly, my posture was flawless, and the vintage pocket watch Spencer had discarded was secured to my lapel. I looked exactly like the apex predator I was. David, my corporate attorney, walked half a step behind me carrying a massive leather briefcase. I walked the entire length of the boardroom. The steady, rhythmic click of my heels echoed in the deafening silence. Spencer stared at me, his brain completely short-circuited. He looked at my designer suit, then at David, and then back at me. A bizarre, confused laugh escaped his throat. "Fiona, what on earth are you doing here?" Spencer asked, his voice a mixture of embarrassment and rising anger. "This is a highly classified, closed-door corporate meeting. You cannot just wander into my office building. Go home and finish packing your things. The movers are coming at noon." I did not stop walking. I did not look at him. I walked straight past his chair and moved directly to the large leather executive seat at the absolute head of the table. It was the seat reserved for the majority owner. I sat down, crossing my legs, and rested my hands on the glass surface. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be, Spencer," I said, my voice smooth, steady, and echoing with absolute authority. Spencer laughed again, a harsh, mocking sound. He looked at the board members, shaking his head as if apologizing for a misbehaving child. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry about this disruption. My soon-to-be ex-wife is clearly having some sort of emotional breakdown over the divorce. Security should have stopped her at the lobby. I will have her removed immediately." Chairman Sterling did not laugh. He looked at Spencer with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Sit down and shut your mouth," the chairman commanded. "You are speaking to the majority shareholder of this firm." Spencer froze. The mocking smile slid off his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted from the chairman to me and back again. The blood drained from his cheeks. "What are you talking about?" Spencer stammered, gripping the edge of the glass table. "Fiona runs a plant shop. She is a florist. I am the chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings," I announced, letting the words strike him like physical blows. "2 years ago, when you were sobbing on the floor of our bedroom because you had bankrupted this entire firm, I stepped in. I used my venture capital proxy to bail you out. I own 65% of this company, Spencer. Every suit you wear, every dinner you buy, and every single paycheck you have collected for the last 24 months came directly out of my pocket. Spencer collapsed into his chair. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just realized the bridge he was standing on did not actually exist. David stepped forward. He unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a massive 500-page dossier. He dropped it onto the glass table directly in front of Spencer. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot. "Let us review the findings of the emergency forensic audit," I said, tapping a button on the remote control in my hand. The massive projection screen behind me hummed to life. The room was instantly illuminated by high-definition spreadsheets, bank statements, and perfectly organized financial ledgers. I highlighted the exact column of data that would send my husband to federal prison. Over the last 6 months, I continued, my voice sharp and clinical. Spencer has systematically embezzled $200,000 of operational capital from this firm. He intentionally miscoded luxury expenses as client acquisition costs and vendor development. I clicked the remote. A massive high-resolution image of the $12,000 designer handbag Spencer had given Vanessa flashed onto the screen, placed side by side with the fraudulent company receipt. "I used corporate funds to purchase designer handbags, vintage wine, and luxury vacations for his mistress," I stated, gesturing to the screen. "He breached his fiduciary duty to his investors, violated federal tax laws, and committed blatant corporate theft. The evidence in that dossier is absolute and legally actionable." The board members glared at Spencer. They looked ready to tear him apart with their bare hands. Spencer was hyperventilating. His chest heaved as he frantically flipped through the pages of the dossier, seeing his own financial death warrant printed in black and white. He was ruined. His career was over. His reputation was reduced to ashes. But Vanessa was not ready to surrender. Her massive, delusional ego refused to accept that her golden ticket was evaporating. She stood up from her chair, smoothing her conservative business dress, and tried to project the aura of a wealthy, untouchable heiress. "This is an absolutely ridiculous witch hunt," Vanessa declared, tossing her hair over her shoulder and looking down her nose at me. "You are clearly just a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin Spencer because he chose me over you. It does not matter what your little accounting trick says. My family is not going to let this stand." She turned to the board members, flashing them a brilliant, utterly fake smile. "Gentlemen, there is no need to involve the authorities. My father is a major player in the international real estate market. I will have his trust fund wire the missing $200,000 to this firm by the end of the day. We will buy out Fiona's shares entirely, and we will take this company to new heights. You have my word." The board members looked at her in silence. They did not look relieved. They looked like they were watching a train wreck in slow motion. I let out a soft, highly amused laugh. I leaned back in my executive chair and looked at my husband's terrified mistress. "That is an incredibly generous offer, Vanessa," I said smoothly. "But unfortunately, I am the lead investor for this firm, and I have a very strict policy against doing business with people who are currently fleeing from underground gambling syndicates." Vanessa froze. The color vanished from her face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. Spencer whipped his head around to look at her, his eyes wide with utter confusion. "Gambling syndicates?" Spencer asked, his voice shaking. "Vanessa, what is she talking about? You said your father was wiring the money." I clicked the remote control one final time. The spreadsheet on the massive projection screen disappeared. In its place, crystal clear high-definition video footage began to play. It was the security feed from my guest house living room. The pristine audio of Vanessa and Barbara's conversation flooded the quiet boardroom, echoing off the glass walls for every single executive to hear. "There is no trust fund, Barbara." Vanessa's desperate, sobbing voice played from the speakers. "My father went completely bankrupt 5 years ago. He lost everything. I am completely broke, worse than broke. I owe people money. Bad people. $150,000. It is an underground gambling debt." I watched Vanessa completely shatter. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a mortified, choking gasp. She sank back into her chair, trying to make herself as small as physically possible. The refined, wealthy heiress illusion had just been violently ripped away, exposing the broke, desperate parasite underneath. The video continued playing. The board members listened in absolute disgust as Vanessa confessed to living on credit cards, getting evicted from her condo, and plotting to use Spencer's corporate accounts to pay off her dangerous creditors. Spencer stared at the screen, his entire reality crumbling into dust. He looked at Vanessa, the woman he had thrown away a decade of marriage for. He realized she was not a billionaire savior. She was a massive walking liability who had played him for an absolute fool. I clicked the remote, shutting off the video feed. I rested my hands on the table and looked at my husband. "You thought you were a titan of industry, Spencer," I said quietly. "You thought you were outsmarting a faceless investor and trading up for a high society heiress. The truth is, you were just a pathetic middleman stealing my money to impress a woman who was actively planning to rob you blind." Spencer dropped his head onto the glass table. He let out a loud, agonizing sob. His empire was dead, his mistress was a fraud, and the wife he had treated like garbage held the executioner's axe. The first phase of the slaughter was officially complete. Now it was time to finish the job. The heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom swung open once again. This time it was not a corporate attorney or a board member. It was Barbara. She marched into the room with her chin held high, clutching her expensive leather handbag. She had completely ignored the terrified receptionist outside, barging into the executive suite, expecting to witness a coronation. She fully anticipated seeing her son signing multi-million-dollar contracts with a wealthy heiress, while her pathetic plant shop-owning daughter-in-law wept in the corner. Instead, she walked into a corporate graveyard. Barbara stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at Spencer, who was slumped over the glass table with his head in his hands, weeping uncontrollably. She looked at Vanessa, who was curled up in her chair, shaking and completely stripped of her arrogant glamour. Finally, her eyes landed on me, sitting perfectly composed at the head of the table. "Fiona, what on earth are you doing sitting in that chair?" Barbara shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the boardroom. "Get up immediately." "Spencer, what is going on here? Why is Vanessa crying? I demand to know why my son is being mistreated in his own building." I did not stand up. I simply leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool glass. "Your son does not own this building, Barbara," I replied calmly. "And as of exactly 10 minutes ago, he no longer works here either." Barbara let out a loud, mocking scoff. She marched toward the table, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "You are completely delusional. Spencer is the chief executive officer. Vanessa's family is buying this firm. They are securing our legacy. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous florist who cannot handle being replaced by a woman of actual high society breeding." I looked at David. He did not need a verbal command. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, perfectly crisp piece of legal paper. He slid it straight down the length of the glass table. It stopped directly in front of Barbara. "I suggest you read that very carefully, Barbara," I said, watching her eyes dart down to the document. "It is a formal, legally binding 24-hour eviction notice." Barbara scoffed again, though her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the paper. "You cannot evict me from my own home, Fiona. Spencer holds the deed." Spencer held the deed, I corrected smoothly. "But he took out a massive second mortgage on that property 2 years ago to cover his failing commercial builds. He could not make the payments. The bank was quietly preparing to foreclose on your beautiful suburban mansion. I stepped in and purchased the mortgage in full through a private holding company. I own your house, Barbara. I own the roof over your head, the guest house you let Vanessa infest, and the very lawn you threw my clothes onto." The color vanished from Barbara's face. The paper shook violently in her hands. "You have until noon tomorrow to pack your belongings and vacate my property." I continued, my voice absolutely devoid of mercy. "If you or your son are found on the premises after 12 o'clock, I will have the local authorities arrest you both for criminal trespassing." Barbara opened her mouth, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She looked at Spencer for help, but Spencer was too busy drowning in his own catastrophic ruin to save her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was losing her mansion. She was losing her status. She was about to be homeless. I turned my attention back to my husband. The final thread needed to be cut. "Spencer, look at me," I commanded. He slowly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face stained with tears and sweat. He looked absolutely pathetic. You are officially terminated for cause, I stated, making sure the board members heard every single word. Because you committed documented corporate fraud and embezzled operating capital, your employment contract is voided. You are stripped of your executive title, you forfeit all remaining equity, and your severance package is entirely revoked. You are leaving this building with absolutely nothing. Spencer let out a desperate, choking gasp. Fiona, please, he begged, his voice cracking. You cannot do this to me. I built this company. I gave everything to this firm. You stole from this firm, I corrected him sharply. And worse, you were foolish enough to sign the fast-track preliminary separation agreement yesterday morning, without letting your junior counsel review the commingled debt clause. Spencer froze. The mention of the legal document seemed to restart his panicked brain. The co-mingled debt clause, he whispered. David stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. Yes, Mr. Sterling. The clause clearly stated that by rushing the asset separation, you legally assume all of your new partner's undisclosed debts if you commingle finances before the divorce is finalized. You bought Vanessa a $12,000 handbag using corporate funds. You moved her into your guest house. You financially linked yourself to her. I smiled at him. A cold, absolute smile. Congratulations, Spencer. You just legally absorbed Vanessa's $150,000 underground gambling debt. Those dangerous creditors she is hiding from are no longer looking for her. They are looking for you. Spencer let out a visceral, horrifying scream. He pushed himself out of his chair and fell hard onto his knees right on the boardroom floor. He crawled toward my end of the table, clasping his hands together in a gesture of pure, absolute desperation. Fiona, I am begging you, Spencer cried, tears pouring down his face. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I was manipulated. Vanessa tricked me. My mother got into my head. I never wanted to lose you. You are my wife. You are the only woman who ever truly supported me. Please give me a second chance. I will do anything. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. Do not let them take me to prison. Please. The board members watched the display in stunned silence. The arrogant, boastful CEO who had swaggered into the room just 30 minutes ago was now weeping on the carpet, begging the wife he had treated like garbage for mercy. I looked down at him. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel satisfaction or joy. I felt absolutely nothing for the man kneeling in front of me. He was a stranger. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the finalized, fully executed divorce decree, and slid it across the glass table. It stopped right at the edge, hovering just above his head. I do not negotiate with bad investments, I said coldly. I signaled to the heavy security detail standing by the mahogany doors. The guards stepped forward immediately. They hauled Spencer to his feet by his armpits. They grabbed Vanessa by the arm, forcing her to drop her stolen designer bag. They flanked Barbara, who was hyperventilating and clutching her eviction notice like a shield. Get them out of my building, I ordered. The security team dragged them out of the boardroom. Spencer was screaming my name, crying and thrashing against the guards. Vanessa was sobbing hysterically, burying her face in her hands. Barbara looked like a hollow shell of a human being. The heavy doors swung shut behind them, cutting off their pathetic cries and sealing their fate forever. The boardroom fell silent again. I looked around the table at the 5 senior executives. They were staring at me with a mixture of profound shock and deep, undeniable respect. Now, gentlemen, I said, folding my hands neatly on the table, let us discuss the restructuring of this firm. We have a lot of work to do. 3 months later, the dust had completely settled, and the landscape of my life was beautifully unrecognizable. The consequences of that morning in the boardroom had ripped through their lives like a hurricane. Spencer was currently facing multiple federal indictments for corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. His assets had been entirely seized by the government, and he was awaiting trial while working a grueling minimum wage job stocking shelves at a suburban warehouse. Every single penny he earned was immediately garnished by the aggressive, highly dangerous underground gambling syndicate he had legally chained himself to. He was living in a constant state of paranoia and exhaustion. Vanessa did exactly what a parasite does when the host organism dies. She vanished. The second she realized Spencer was broke and the debt had shifted to him, she packed a single duffel bag and fled the state in the middle of the night. No one had heard from her since. She was just another desperate grifter running from her own shadow. Barbara's downfall was perhaps the most poetic. Following the 24-hour eviction, she was forced to move into a cramped, incredibly run-down one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The story of her son's corporate firing and her own eviction had spread through her elite country club like wildfire. The high society women she had spent decades trying to impress completely blacklisted her. She became a total social pariah. She spent her days sitting in a dingy apartment completely isolated, mourning the fake kingdom she had lost, simply because she could not treat her daughter-in-law with basic human decency. As for me, I took complete control of the commercial real estate firm. I purged the toxic, greedy executives Spencer had hired and rebuilt the company from the ground up. I shifted our corporate focus, entirely prioritizing sustainable, ethical commercial developments and investing heavily in affordable housing initiatives specifically designed for women leaving abusive and financially controlling situations. The firm was not just profitable, it was actively doing good in the world. The plant shop, my beloved little nursery, remained open. I hired an amazing manager to run the day-to-day operations, ensuring my sanctuary continued to thrive. I sat on the expansive, sun-drenched balcony of a luxury villa in Santorini, Greece. The Mediterranean Sea stretched out before me, an endless sparkling expanse of deep sapphire blue. A warm breeze swept over the terrace carrying the scent of sea salt and blooming bougainvillea. I took a slow sip of my perfectly chilled white wine and leaned back into the plush cushions of my lounge chair. I had taken this vacation entirely for myself. Not for business, not for optics, and certainly not to impress anyone else. I had come here to celebrate my absolute freedom. I listened to the gentle crash of the waves against the cliffs below. I realized in that moment that my true wealth had never been the millions of dollars sitting in my offshore venture capital accounts. It was not the real estate portfolio or the corporate titles. My true wealth was the unshakable, profound realization of my own worth. I had allowed myself to shrink for 5 long years to make a small, insecure man feel big. I would never make that mistake again. They thought they could replace me. They thought they could humiliate me and discard me without consequence. They did not realize they were just giving me the perfect excuse to finally take out the trash.